Well, another night of protests sweeping the nation and world, all ignited by the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police.
Just 15 minutes outside of Minneapolis is St. Paul, a city that's been ravaged by the protests and looting. We're joined now by St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
So for those watching at home that may be unaware, tell us how your city has been responding to these protests.
I think our city has been responding in similar ways to the rest of the country. You know, we look at these videos, video after video after video, black man after black man after black man, and women who are unarmed, who are unaggressive, who are not only killed in these gruesome ways by law enforcement, but there seems to be absolutely no accountability when we see these officers either not charged or go to court and be acquitted anyways. And so obviously that creates a large amount of rage, a large amount of frustration. And I think it's important to note that that all didn't start 10 years ago when we started seeing these videos. I think Will Smith once said something along the lines of racism isn't new, it's just being filmed now. And so we have a lot of emotion, a lot of anger, and we have people channeling it two different ways. We have some folks who are channeling it into just community healing and helping each other with the trauma and, you know, passing water and, you know, free food and music to each other. And we have people in our community who have clearly come to create destruction, to smash windows, and to start fires in our community. Our goal is peace, but never patience. And so we're asking folks to express their anger in peaceful ways, but we're not asking people to sit on the sidelines and wait while we slowly and incrementally slow the tide of Black lives being lost at the hands of law enforcement.
And as you know, the state has filed a civil rights charge against the Minneapolis Police Department, a historic move in cases like this. So do you think that this move is going to amplify today's protests?
I don't know. That'll remain to be seen. Thankfully, as we've implemented a curfew, as we've engaged residents, I think the majority of our residents are really ready to say, like, you know, we need the focus where it is, where it needs to be. The focus needs to be on the fact that Mr. Floyd should still be alive today, that all four of those officers who were responsible for his death need to be held accountable in a court of law, and that we have like deep soul-searching work to do as a country and as a community to stop seeing this happen over and over and over again. I'm sorry, I'm working from home here. To stop seeing this happening over and over and over again. And I think so far our community has really stood to the forefront as we've seen powerful, beautiful, peaceful protests over the last few days where people have come together to say, we're going to be peaceful. We're not going to destroy our own neighborhoods. That would be a horrible way to express our frustration at injustice against our neighborhoods. But we're not going to be patient. We're not going to, sit aside and wait. We're not going to even trust our mayors, our leaders, anybody to do this while we kind of sit on the sidelines. We have to be engaged. We have to be involved. And I think people know that this is one step, but that this is something that's going to be life work for us. This is something that's going to require broad, sweeping, systemic changes in the way our system works. Because as our governor said yesterday, I was very proud of him, as our governor said yesterday, the outcomes that we're seeing aren't the result of a broken system or a system that's not working. They're the result of a system that's producing the exact outcomes it's designed to produce in the first place.
What actions do you think need to be taken place from the state to the federal level to address police brutality and also to settle the tensions between the community and police officers?
It's a great question. You know, my father was a St. Paul police officer for 30 years almost. And so I grew up every day praying for the safety of our officers. I grew up knowing what it feels like to turn on the news and see some horrific story playing out in our city and have my, heart in my stomach hoping and praying that he's all right. I also then turned 16 and got a driver's license. And I always tell folks I met a whole lot more of his work colleagues then as well. And so I ran for mayor as one of maybe relatively few elected officials in the nation who know what it feels like to be pulled over for driving while Black. So this is something that's I'm very passionate about and that is very personal to me. And this is where that peace but not patience kind of call comes in. I'm asking our folks who have this like energy in them, and we've seen that this energy that's consumed our country over the last week is this powerful nuclear energy that could rip us apart at the seams or it could bring us together in a way that we've never, ever been together before. So, let's not destroy our neighborhoods. Let's not destroy the pharmacies that our senior citizens look to for life-saving medicine in a pandemic. Let's not destroy the grocery stores that our families need to get groceries for their children. But let's channel this rage toward all the things that are laced in state and local laws and federal laws, all the things that are laced in legal precedents, and all the things that are laced in police union contracts that make it so difficult to hold officers accountable. We saw the president of the Minneapolis Police Union just this week write a letter to his members expressing his frustration that the national media won't call George Floyd a violent criminal. That's emblematic of this culture that must end right now.
And obviously, a lot of people have been talking about President Trump's reaction to all of this. He's even threatening to deploy military troops into U.S. cities. So what is your response to that?
I thought that that speech was irresponsible. And beyond that, look, my wife is a midwife, and she serves patients and, does this work, in my opinion, heroically. And she always says that the first step to curing an ailment is defining it, is understanding it. And so while we see the president and some others focused on changing the how are people protesting, I'm trying to remind our community and would love to see the White House have a recognition that until we address the why are people protesting in the first place? A reporter asked me yesterday what I thought it would take to stop the protests. And I told her, look, my goal isn't to stop the protests. I want to see it expressed in acceptable and non-destructive ways. But my goal is to stop the reason people are protesting in the first place. If the president thinks that the problem in America is that we haven't had enough force imposed upon us by people in uniform, then he's clearly not paying attention to what's going on in the country. The challenge is that we have Black and brown men and women who have been disenfranchised, who have been disrespected, who have been treated like less than a human being for so long, and people are tired of it. My grandfather was a veteran, a Navy veteran. He was an accomplished musician. He played trumpet for 4 different United States presidents, but instead of trying to travel the world and seek fortune and fame, he stayed home and worked as a janitor in our public schools to raise his family. When he was working as a Pullman porter on the railroad, and Robert Townsend made a movie about this 20 years ago called 10,000 Black Men Named George. My grandfather's name was Melvin Sr., but no matter what your name was, they just called you George. You didn't even have the right to your own name. And the reason this is so personal for me, and I think so many other people, is that we literally know that whether you're a mayor or an accountant or an architect or a CEO or a painter or teacher, for every Black man in America, we are George Floyd, and there's really nothing we can do about it.
And lastly, what message do you have for people watching at home, especially the African American community?
My message is pretty simple. If you woke up last week and saw that video of George Floyd being killed, brutally, just casually with that officer with his hand in his pocket, is just such a haunting image. If you woke up to that image and found yourself filled with frustration and anger and even rage, you're not alone. I feel that too. The great part about it is all of humanity feels that. Like, I don't know a single police officer or CEO or community activist who can look at that video and say, that feels reasonable. We have an opportunity right now. And my request for folks isn't to not be mad. We should be. It's not to not be impatient. We should be. It's not to be pacifist in this moment. We can't afford to meet this moment with anything less than urgent action. Let's do it in a way that builds up our community. Let's do it in a way that sets up the future for our children in a more positive way. Let's do it in a way that can help us stop the tide of Black men being killed by law enforcement. There are many, many ways that we can express this energy in ways that build for the future. And boy, I'm completely with you as we do that.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for speaking to us this morning and taking the time.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate your coverage.